afternoon. So imagine a couple, they're expecting their first child, or second or third, doesn't matter. They're coming to a maternity unit for their 20 weeks ultrasound scan. And they're very excited at the prospect of seeing their baby on screen, finding out the sex, maybe even finding out some family trait or resemblance on the baby's face. So they wait patiently as the sonographer prepares the woman's abdomen and starts scanning. All eyes are on the monitor as the transducer slides from side to side of the mother's tummy. It's very quiet in the room, and the only sound is that of the Doppler that measures the blood flow in and out of the baby's heart. So the couple soon discover on screen the anatomy of their baby, his liver, his kidney, his stomach. The transducer moves to the genital area, and the sonographer asks, "Would you like to know what you're having?" It's a little boy. The minds wander to imagine milestones. So first tooth, first step, first day at school, first bike crash, first everything. The sonographer remains silent, and she's now looking at the baby's brain, looking at it in depth, at the structure. And she seems to be repeating measurements. So silence engulfs the room for a few long minutes, until the dreaded sentence comes. I'm going to go and check and find a colleague to have a look at it. There's something on screen I'm not 100% sure about, and we need to check. The adrenaline shoots up, and a cognitive battle ensues to remain calm and rationalize the sonographer's words. In the end, there's a suspicion of brain abnormality, but because the brain continues to develop all the way through pregnancy, it is not possible at this point to ascertain whether the issues identified on screen would subside naturally as the baby develops in utero. And so starts the waiting game for a further 9 weeks, with plethora of MRIs, scans, and medical appointments. This particular couple had to wait 9 weeks for a clearer prognosis, yet still not 100% accurate diagnosis could be reached. In the absence of a clear diagnosis, they had to rely on high probabilities that the baby would be born with severe abnormalities to reach a decision. So in the end, they decided to terminate their pregnancy at 29 weeks of gestation. A feticide was conducted to stop the baby's heart, and 48 hours later, labor was induced. This experience is not uncommon among the many couples I spoke to as part of my research in coping with and adjusting to pregnancy termination for fetal anomaly, or termination for medical reason, or TFMR, as it's now referred to in the literature. TFMR is not an isolated experience, while in fact it's 3 times more common than stillbirth and infant deaths combined, and it's thought to be underreported. Yet it's rarely spoken about. So the literature and the research I've conducted point to this experience being actually very complex and a form of bereavement that's really misunderstood and stigma-bearing. From the interviews I've conducted, the TFMR experience can be characterized as one of ambivalence, as couples oscillate between hope and despair during the diagnosis stage, standing still or feeling frozen in time and the need to rush to make decisions. But they're also torn between attachment and detachment from the baby, knowing whether to share their story with others or actually keep it a secret. And they often report or describe this experience as the most terrible experience they've ever had or an ordeal, but yet they also express gratitude having been given the opportunity to end their pregnancy. Because really, what lies at the center of this phenomenon is the notion of choice. Parents decide to terminate a pregnancy that in most cases very much wanted. And so they wonder what that means for the legitimacy of their loss. And they report struggling with mourning for a baby for a loss that is very much self-inflicted. The terminology of choice is itself problematic, and it's often referred to as a travesty. What kind of choice are we really talking about here? A choice between bad and terrible, a choice between ending a wanted pregnancy and having a baby with severe abnormalities, maybe a baby that won't survive birth. The decision-making process for couple is extremely complex, but as one parent put it to me, there's just not one good decision. Choice is also where stigma comes from, because despite being a very intimate and individual experience, TFMR is often discussed through the prism of social norms and macropolitics, because it's mainly rooted in two debates that are polarized and polarizing. The first one is about women's reproductive rights, and it centers on questions such as whose right it is to terminate a pregnancy and whether the fetus has any rights. The second debate is about eugenics and raises questions such as what kind of life is worth living and what kind of medical condition can pregnancies be terminated for. And even questions such as is prenatal diagnosis a kind of soft form of eugenics that is state-sponsored. Many parents struggle situating their experience as society strongly encourages prenatal diagnosis, yet also strongly advocates for social inclusion. So these debates form the backdrop of individual experiences alongside laws, policy, and healthcare practices, and they generate social norms around reproductive loss that not only reflect but also shape individual experiences. This leads to questions such as, is there a drive for secrecy? Should it be kept secret? Or even the experience of self-blame or even shame that some participants reported to me. But also, these norms also weigh heavily upon the way people adapt to this experience. So not only the loss, but what happened afterwards. So imagine the couple again. Imagine that it's now, 2 months after termination. Imagine the woman, so almost always about the woman. She's back at work, she's going out with her friends, she's talking, thinking, planning another pregnancy. And pause for a moment. How do you think society view this? How do you view this? How do you react to this apparent quick recovery? Based on our social norms, would we not expect this woman to maybe manifest her grief in a more open or intense way? Conversely, imagine the same couple again, maybe 10 months post-termination. The woman has not really been able to leave her home, and she's in a permanent state of sadness, despair, or self-blame. What do you think would society conclude then? What would you conclude then? Then perhaps she hasn't really been able to adjust psychologically? Perhaps that she's suffering from complicated grief? This scenario really aimed to illustrate how socially constructed our experiences are. And this is valid for the loss itself, but also what happens afterwards. So one post-TFMR trajectory I'd like to spend the remainder of that talk focused on is post-traumatic growth. Much has been written about post-traumatic growth in the past 30 years, and one can look at the work from TEDxUniversity and Caroline in the US, or Joseph in the UK. As opposed to resilience, post-traumatic growth is not about bouncing back or going back to previous level of functioning. It really is about going beyond existing boundaries. It is a transformation that occurs as a result of trauma. Excuse me. Of course, no one here is saying that trauma produces growth. Rather, it is the intensity of the cognitive work that is required to deal with the trauma that is conducive to growth. So in other words, there can't be any post-traumatic growth without distress and the work associated with coping with it. The TFMR experience has the potential to destroy or disrupt previously held beliefs about the world. Beliefs such as that the world is a safe place, the world is a just place, good things happen to good people. And here I'm referring to the work by Janov Bullman and her shattered assumption theory. So many women couples start their pregnancy in a full sense of security, thinking that if they eat well and look after themselves, everything will be fine. No one really goes to a maternity scan thinking that it's a screening test. No one really knows that the 20-week scan is referred to as the anomaly scan by healthcare professionals, and that actually there are 11 markers that sonographers look for. So when something goes wrong in pregnancy, it really shatters people's sense of security. And it is because this sense of security is shattered that people engage in building new ways of seeing the world. And this is what post-traumatic growth is about, is a transformation or creation of new ways to apprehend the world. So how does post-traumatic growth manifest itself? The literature points to 5 main domains of growth. The first one is personal strengths, new opportunities, new possibilities, relating to others, appreciation of life, and spirituality. In the context of TFMR, women in particular have reported growth in 3 main areas. The first one is personal strengths, with women often describing themselves as survivors, as warriors or fighters that survive the storm. The second one is about new possibilities, with women reporting new perspective, new paths, new direction in their life. And finally, relating to others, with maybe a renewed sense of empathy, closeness to others, feeling less judgmental. What the literature also points to is that post-traumatic growth is facilitated by what we call deliberate rumination. So what is deliberate rumination? Well, as opposed to intrusive rumination, it is really intrusive rumination being uncontrolled thoughts racing to the brain. Deliberate rumination is the process whereby people engage in repetitive, purposeful, and deliberate thinking about the traumatic event. And in a way, it could be equated to having the space, the time to process the event, maybe also reframing some of its elements, deriving meaning, and weaving into one's own personal narrative. These tasks are cognitively very demanding, and they take time. And this is why post-traumatic growth manifests itself, if at all, quite some time after a trauma. So from the interviews I've conducted with people, with the couples I've talked to, I can recall many occasions where people have reported to me transformation, new ways of seeing the world, new priorities, making new friends, maybe losing some, new sense of purpose and meaning. And one may say, well, maybe those changes are not real. Maybe these are just post-hoc rationalization of their experience. But I would say this is really how people perceive the experience that counts. And on top of that, the literature usually, where changes are reported, they're often corroborated by significant others. So from an experience that can be very traumatic, it is indeed possible for individuals to derive a sense of empowerment and growth. That is not to say that we should expect growth from everyone who is going through a trauma. Let's not fall into this social trap again, social norm trap. But at least we should entertain the possibility of it and be mindful of the social expectation we place upon individuals who go through this kind of loss and the way they manifest it and the way they adjust to it. So going back to the theme this series of talk is based on, which is beyond boundaries or existing boundaries, I would say that the experience of TFMR, despite being extremely traumatic or reported as such by couples, can actually lead to positive transformation and growth. And to me, this journey has been extremely humbling, and I feel very privileged to have been the witness of so many positive transformations in, at times, very, very challenging circumstances. Thank you.